The warning from the stars. Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of the International Space Station, watching Earth turn slowly beneath her. The blue marble had never looked more beautiful or more fragile. Beside her, Commander James Chen floated closer to the window, his expression troubled. "They're real," James said quietly. "After all the speculation and debate, we finally have proof we're not alone." Elena nodded. The message had arrived 3 days ago, broadcast simultaneously to every radio telescope on Earth. The translation had been simple, almost insultingly so, as if the senders wanted to make sure even primitive humans could understand their ultimatum. The Korthan Empire had given humanity 6 months to evacuate the solar system. They claimed Earth's location was strategically valuable for their trade routes. The asteroid belt contained resources they needed. Humanity was simply in the way. The warning had been polite but firm. Leave peacefully, or be removed by force. Down on Earth, the response had been chaos at first. Governments scrambled to verify the authenticity of the message. Religious leaders debated its meaning. Scientists argued about whether the threat was real or an elaborate hoax. Then the Korthan ships appeared. 15 massive vessels materialized at the edge of the solar system, each one the size of a small moon. They didn't attack. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a demonstration of power that made humanity's greatest achievements look like children's toys. Elena remembered the day she watched the footage of the Korthan ship passing Mars. The red planet had looked tiny next to the alien vessel, like a basketball floating past a skyscraper. Humanity had been so proud of their Mars rovers, their plans for future colonies. Now those dreams seemed almost laughable. "The Security Council is meeting again," James said, checking his tablet. "China, Russia, and the United States are finally talking to each other without shouting. That's something, I guess." "Fear makes strange allies," Elena replied. Below them, Earth's cities glowed in the darkness. New York, Beijing, Mumbai, Lagos. Billions of people going about their lives, trying to process the impossible news that they had 6 months to leave the only home humanity had ever known. The official response from the United Nations had been defiant. Humanity would not abandon Earth. This was their planet, their birthright. They would negotiate, find common ground, make the Korthans understand that Earth wasn't just a piece of real estate. The Korthans had not responded to any communication attempts. They simply waited, silent and ominous, at the edge of the solar system. "Do you think we have a chance?" James asked. Elena looked at her colleague and friend. They had trained together, flown missions together, shared dreams of humanity's future among the stars. Now those dreams were being crushed by beings who saw Earth as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. "I think," Elena said carefully, "that humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters. We've climbed from caves to space stations. We've split atoms and mapped genomes. We're stubborn, creative, and we don't give up easily." "That's not an answer." "No," Elena admitted. "But it's all I have right now." A priority alert flashed on James's tablet. His face went pale as he read the message. "What is it?" Elena asked. "The Korthans just sent another transmission. They're offering a demonstration of their capabilities. They say it will help humanity understand the futility of resistance." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "When?" 2 hours. They've announced the target coordinates." James looked up, his eyes wide with horror. "They're going to destroy the abandoned International Space Colony Station near the Moon. They want everyone on Earth to watch." The old ISC station had been humanity's first attempt at building a permanent space habitat. It had been decommissioned 5 years ago when funding ran out, but it still held enormous symbolic value. It represented humanity's dreams of expanding beyond Earth. "They're sending a message," Elena said bitterly. "This is what we'll do to your dreams." The next 2 hours passed in tense silence. Elena and James joined the rest of the ISS crew in the observation module. Someone had set up a live feed showing the view from a telescope trained on the ISC station. The abandoned colony hung peacefully in space, its solar panels catching the sunlight. Elena had visited it once, years ago. She remembered walking through its empty corridors, imagining the families that were supposed to have lived there. Then a Corthan ship appeared in the frame. It was smaller than the massive vessels at the solar system's edge, but still enormous compared to the human structure. A beam of purple light shot from the alien vessel. The ISC station simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, atomized into particles too small to see. No explosion, no debris field. Just instant annihilation. The feed went dark. Nobody spoke. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, she saw something on James's face that matched what she was feeling. Not defeat. Not despair. Something harder and more dangerous. Anger. They made a mistake, James said quietly. What do you mean? They think they're teaching us a lesson. They think this demonstration will make us afraid. James turned to look at Elena, and his expression was fierce. But they just showed us exactly what kind of enemy they are. They destroy things that can't fight back. They threaten the defenseless. They're bullies. Elena felt a cold clarity settling over her. And humanity has never responded well to bullies. News from Earth came flooding in over the next hours. The destruction of the ISC station had been broadcast live to every screen on the planet. Billions of people had watched humanity's dream turn to dust by an alien weapon. The Corthans had expected fear and surrender. What they got instead was rage. Within 24 hours, every nation on Earth had pledged their full resources to a unified defense effort. Old rivalries were set aside. Classified military technologies were shared openly. Scientists who had been competing for research grants were now collaborating across borders. The message to the Corthans was unanimous and clear: humanity would not leave Earth. If the aliens wanted this planet, they would have to take it by force. Elena watched the news feeds with growing amazement. She saw factory workers in Detroit volunteering for extra shifts to increase production. She saw scientists in Tokyo and Moscow working together on problems that had seemed unsolvable just days before. She saw people from every nation, culture, and background united by a single purpose. They wanted to break our spirit, James said, watching the same feeds. Instead, they gave us something we've never really had before. What's that? A common enemy. A shared purpose. For the first time in history, humanity isn't divided by borders or ideologies or resources. We're united against an external threat. James smiled grimly. The Corthans just made the biggest mistake of their existence. Elena pulled up the latest reports from the ground. Governments were redirecting their entire industrial capacity toward defense. The private space companies were sharing their technologies. Universities were running crash courses to train new engineers and scientists. It was impossible, of course. Humanity couldn't match the Corthans' technology in 6 months. They couldn't even match it in 6 years. The technology gap was measured in centuries, maybe millennia. But as Elena read through the reports, she realized something important. The Corthans had made assumptions about humanity based on their observations. They saw humans as primitive, divided, and weak. They expected a species that spent most of its energy fighting itself to crumble when faced with a superior force. They didn't understand that humanity's greatest strength had always been adaptation. Humans survived ice ages by learning to make fire and clothing. They survived diseases by developing medicine. They survived wars by developing diplomacy. They survived scarcity by developing technology. Now they would learn to survive an alien invasion. Somehow. Look at this, James said, pulling up a classified report. The military is calling it Project Exodus, but it's not what you think. They're not building evacuation ships. Elena read the document with growing interest. Project Exodus was indeed about ships, but not for running away. They were designing thousands of small, fast vessels. Not warships in the traditional sense, but something else entirely. Missiles, she said, understanding dawning. They're building missiles. Smart missiles, James corrected. With AI guidance systems, nuclear payloads, and one purpose, to get through Corthan shields by any means necessary. It was a desperate plan. Even with thousands of missiles, the chances of penetrating advanced alien defenses were slim. But it was better than surrender. It was humanity saying that if they were going to die, they would die fighting. Elena thought about the Corthans waiting at the edge of the solar system. They probably weren't worried. They probably saw human preparations as amusing, like watching ants try to organize a defense against a boot. But ants could bite. And when there were enough of them, even a boot could be overwhelmed. 5 months and 28 days left, James said, checking the countdown that now appeared on every screen worldwide. Elena looked down at Earth one more time. The blue marble was still beautiful, still fragile. But now it was also something else. It was home. And humanity would defend it with everything they had. The Underground War. Dr. Sarah Kim stood 3 miles beneath the Nevada desert, watching the greatest construction project in human history take shape. The cavern around her was the size of a football stadium, carved out of solid rock in just 6 weeks. Hundreds of workers swarmed over massive machines that looked like they belonged in a science fiction film. Production Line 7 is online, her assistant Marcus reported, his voice barely audible over the industrial noise. We're now manufacturing 43 power cores per day. Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. 43 was good, but not good enough. At current production rates, they would have enough cores for maybe 3,000 missiles by the deadline. The military wanted 10,000. Tell them to increase the cooling cycles, she said. I know it's risky, but we need to push harder. Marcus hesitated. Doctor, we're already operating beyond safety margins. If one of these cores goes critical. If one core goes critical, 100 people die, Sarah interrupted. If the Corthans decide to stop waiting, 8 billion people die. I'll take those odds. She walked away before Marcus could argue further. She knew he was right to be concerned. The power cores they were building used a radical new fusion design that was barely tested. In normal circumstances, it would take years of careful research and development. They had 6 months. Everything humanity was doing now would have been impossible 6 months ago. Not because the technology didn't exist, but because the will didn't exist. Countries had hoarded their secrets. Corporations had protected their patents. Scientists had competed instead of collaborated. The Corthan threat had changed everything. Sarah passed through a security checkpoint into the next cavern. This one was even larger, containing the assembly lines for the missile bodies themselves. Robotic arms worked at incredible speed, welding together components that came from 100 different facilities around the world. Japanese electronics met Russian metallurgy. American aerospace engineering combined with Chinese manufacturing efficiency. Israeli guidance systems interfaced with European propulsion technology. The missiles being built here were truly products of a united Earth. Dr. Kim, a voice called out. General Thomas Hawthorne approached, his military uniform somehow still crisp despite the dust and heat of the underground facility. I need an update for the Joint Chiefs. Sarah brought up the production charts on her tablet. We're ahead of schedule on the missile bodies, but behind on the power cores. The neural net processors are performing better than expected. The warheads. She hesitated. What about the warheads? They work. They'll penetrate shields. But the yield is lower than we hoped. Each missile will do damage, but not as much as our models predicted. General Hawthorne studied the numbers with a practiced eye. So we'll need more missiles. A lot more. Then we build more. The general's tone made it sound simple. I'll authorize the opening of Facility 12 in Chile and Facility 18 in Australia. That should double our production capacity. Sarah wanted to point out the resource constraints, the technical challenges, the 1,000 reasons why doubling production was nearly impossible. But she had learned over the past months that impossible had lost its meaning. I'll need more trained personnel, she said instead. You'll have them. We're graduating new engineers every week from the accelerated programs. Hawthorne looked around the massive cavern with something like pride. 5 months ago, this chamber didn't exist. 4 months ago, we didn't know how to build what we're building now. Humanity is learning fast, Doctor. The question is whether we're learning fast enough. Sarah followed his gaze. In the distance, a completed missile was being loaded onto a transport vehicle. It was sleek and deadly, covered in the matte black coating that helped it absorb radar and sensor scans. 50 feet long and packed with enough destructive power to level a city. And it was probably still not enough to scratch a Corthan ship's paint. Do you think we have a chance, General? Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment. Honestly? The numbers say no. The Corthans have technology we can barely understand. Their ships are bigger, faster, and better protected than anything we can build. In a straight fight, they would wipe us out in minutes. That's not very encouraging. But, Hawthorne continued, the numbers also said we couldn't build this facility in 6 weeks. The numbers said we couldn't unify every nation on Earth under a single command structure. The numbers said we couldn't train 1 million new soldiers and engineers in 4 months. We did all of that because we had to. Sarah appreciated his optimism, even if she wasn't sure she shared it. The truth was that Project Exodus was a desperate gamble. They were building thousands of missiles, yes, but they had no way to test them against actual Corthan shields. All their calculations were based on incomplete data and educated guesses. Her tablet beeped with an urgent message. Sir, we have a situation. The Deep Space Observation Network just picked up movement. The Corthans? Yes. 3 of their ships are moving into the inner solar system. They're heading toward Earth. General Hawthorne's expression hardened. How long until they arrive? Sarah did the calculations quickly. At their current speed, 72 hours. They're coming to check our progress. Hawthorne pulled out his communicator. This is Hawthorne. Initiate Protocol Defiance. I want every missile we have ready for transport to the launch sites within 24 hours. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Protocol Defiance was the emergency deployment plan. It meant taking missiles that weren't fully tested, loading them onto rockets that had been rushed through safety checks, and preparing for immediate combat. It also meant humanity's deadline had just been cut from 5 months to 3 days. Within hours, the underground facility transformed into controlled chaos. Finished missiles were rushed through final checks and loaded onto massive transport vehicles. The workers who had been operating on rotating shifts were now working continuously, fueled by stimulants and desperation. Sarah found herself in the command center, watching multiple screens showing similar scenes from facilities around the world. The Chilean site was ahead of schedule. The Australian facility had suffered a power failure but was recovering. The Chinese facility was performing miracles, outputting missiles at twice their projected rate. Status report, General Hawthorne demanded as he entered the command center. We have 1,732 operational missiles, Sarah reported. Another 400 will be ready within 12 hours. That's not even close to what we need. It's what we have, Hawthorne said flatly. Colonel Martinez, deployment status. A stocky woman in Air Force uniform looked up from her console. Launch sites Alpha through Omega are receiving missiles now. We're spreading them across all 7 continents plus 3 ocean platforms. The Corthans won't be able to target them all at once. What about the decoys? Mixing them with the real missiles as planned. For every real warhead, we'll have 3 decoys. Maybe it'll force them to waste shots. Sarah listened to the military planning with a growing sense of unreality. They were preparing to fight an interstellar empire with weapons that had barely left the prototype stage. It was insane. It was also humanity's only chance. Dr. Kim, Hawthorne said, pulling her aside. I need you to be honest with me. What are our actual odds? Sarah took a deep breath. Based on what we know about Corthan shields and our missile capabilities, less than 1% chance of inflicting significant damage. And if we do nothing? 0% chance of survival. Hawthorne nodded slowly. 1% is better than 0. We'll take it. He walked away to coordinate with other commanders, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She pulled up the data on her tablet, studying the missile specifications for the 1000th time. There had to be something they were missing, some edge they could exploit. The Corthan shields were energy-based, capable of stopping anything traveling below light speed. But they required enormous amounts of power. If humanity could somehow overload those shields, make the Corthans drain their power reserves. An idea began to form. Marcus, she called to her assistant. The nuclear warheads. Can we modify them to release their energy over an extended period instead of a single blast? Marcus looked confused. Theoretically. Maybe. But that would reduce the immediate damage significantly. I'm not trying to cause damage, Sarah explained, her mind racing. I'm trying to make the shields work harder. If we hit them with sustained radiation bursts instead of kinetic impacts, they'll have to maintain full power constantly. We could drain their reserves. That's, actually brilliant. But we'd need to reprogram every warhead, and we don't have time. Then we start with what we can manage. Even 100 modified missiles could make a difference. Sarah was already typing commands into her tablet, sending specifications to the weapons teams. Tell every facility to begin modifications on any missiles that haven't been deployed yet. Over the next 24 hours, Sarah barely slept. She coordinated with weapons specialists across the globe, refining the modification plans, solving technical problems through video conferences at 3 in the morning. The fatigue made her hands shake, but she kept working. Because in 48 hours, the Corthans would arrive. And humanity would show these aliens that they had made a terrible mistake. They had mistaken humanity's technological inferiority for weakness. They hadn't understood that humans were at their most dangerous when they had everything to lose. They hadn't realized that a species capable of splitting atoms and reaching the moon in one lifetime could learn very, very quickly when properly motivated. Sarah looked at the countdown clock on the wall. 46 hours and 17 minutes until the Corthan ships reached Earth orbit. 46 hours to finish preparing humanity's response. 46 hours until the world learned whether courage and determination could overcome superior technology. Sarah returned to her work with renewed focus. 1% odds were better than 0. And throughout history, humanity had made impossible victories out of worse odds than that. The Corthans were about to learn that lesson the hard way.